It started with a whisper, a quiet, uncomfortable murmur in green rooms, private dinners, and industry lounges. A murmur that grew louder every week until finally, someone with a big enough microphone decided to say it out loud. And that someone was Joe Rogan. Now here's the question that nobody ever expected to hear. A question so shocking that even the most cynical Hollywood insiders paused when they first heard it. But before we continue, please subscribe and turn on the notification bell for updates. Has Hollywood finally banned Meghan Markle for good? It's a question that feels almost forbidden. A question that carries enough voltage to send shockwaves through two continents. The United States, where Meghan fought to reinvent herself as an A-list icon, and the United Kingdom, where the monarchy still whispers her name with a mix of disbelief and fatigue. But the real jolt, the real voltage, came from the unlikely place where this entire conversation exploded: a podcast microphone, a cigar in hand, and Joe Rogan sitting across from another guest as he casually dropped the kind of industry truth bomb that makes headlines for weeks. People are sick of them. The act has gotten stale. He said it just like that. Flat. Unfiltered. The way only Rogan can say something that rings as brutally honest to some and wildly controversial to others. But what really matters isn't just his delivery. It's the fact that his statement didn't hang in the air alone. It echoed a sentiment already spreading across Hollywood. A sentiment that insiders had been whispering long before Rogan ever said a word. But let me pause here and ask you, the viewer, how did we get here? How did the couple who once looked like the future of a modern monarchy end up as the industry duo Hollywood executives now avoid like a bad investment? How did two people with royal titles, global fame, and a $100 million Netflix deal burn through every ounce of goodwill faster than anyone thought possible? And most importantly, why now? Here's where the story begins to twist, because this isn't just a Hollywood gossip piece. This isn't just another round of criticism directed at the Sussexes. This is a deeper story. One that combines celebrity culture, politics, reputation, work ethic, image management, and the cold, ruthless calculus of an entertainment industry that has no patience for what it calls dead weight. Now let's rewind for a moment. The day Meghan Markle and Prince Harry packed their bags, stepped back from royal duties, and moved into their Montecito mansion, Hollywood didn't just greet them. Hollywood embraced them. Agents were excited. Producers were optimistic. Executives smiled the way executives do when they see an opportunity. For a moment, it felt like the royal couple had finally discovered their kingdom, a place where celebrity is currency, reinvention is normal, and narrative control is practically an art form. But that honeymoon phase didn't last long. Because as the world has seen, Hollywood isn't a place that gives endless chances. Hollywood is a place of brutal math. You either bring value or you drain it. And according to insiders, something switched. The expectations were sky high, but the results, well, let's just say things didn't go the way Meghan and Harry hoped. So what exactly happened behind closed doors? For starters, there was the Netflix deal, the one everyone talked about. The one that was supposed to launch the couple into media royalty. $100 million. Multi-year. Massive hype. Except most people don't know what insiders said when the dust settled. That the deal was quietly downgraded to a simple first-look arrangement. Translation? The excitement dried up quick. The deliverables weren't there. And the relationship, at least from Netflix's point of view, was rapidly becoming a headache. Then came the meetings. The now infamous story that has been retold with raised eyebrows and uncomfortable chuckles across the industry. Prince Harry arriving late. Prince Harry asking for hot chocolate. Executives scrambling because there was no hot chocolate in the building. Assistants running around as if the royal family had just walked into a low-budget startup office. And then, the pitch. An idea floated by Spotify or Netflix staff, depending on which insider you believe. What if Harry reviewed a hot chocolate every week while chatting with a different friend? A harmless idea? Sure. But symbolic? Absolutely. It told executives one thing. They were grasping for any concept, any format. That would actually work, because the original vision had already started sinking. And let's not forget the Spotify fiasco. Vanity Fair published the accounts of frustrated employees. People describing the chaos, the confusion, the lack of direction. One employee said Harry asked for his drink of choice. Again, hot chocolate. And when the office had none, staff scrambled to procure it. Some found the story hilarious. Others found it concerning. But Hollywood insiders? They found it telling. The same report claimed Meghan and Harry's ideas were inconsistent at best, that scripts arrived late or incomplete, that meetings became therapy sessions, that expectations were sky-high but execution was, well, non-existent. I've got a question for you. Have you ever seen a Hollywood studio scramble like this for any other celebrity? Any other talent? Any other couple? Probably not. Because here's the truth Hollywood doesn't like to say in public. If you're difficult, if you're demanding, if you're inconsistent, then you better be extraordinarily talented or extraordinarily profitable. And for Meghan and Harry, insiders claim neither was true. Still, this alone wasn't what Joe Rogan was referring to when he said people were sick of them. No, his statement pointed to something much deeper. Something less about meetings and contracts and more about the couple's entire public persona. The act has gotten stale. What act? Which part? The interviews? The victim storylines? The dramatic pauses? The strained metaphors? The Oprah moment? The repeated narrative of being misunderstood, mistreated, marginalized by nearly everyone except each other? Even longtime supporters started feeling fatigued. The public attention shifted. The enthusiasm evaporated. And Hollywood, always watching, took note. People assume Hollywood operates on political bias or personal loyalty. It doesn't. Not truly. Hollywood operates on something far simpler and far colder: usefulness. If people watch you, you're in. If people stop watching, you're out. And according to Joe Rogan, and the dozens of insiders mirroring his sentiments, Meghan and Harry weren't just losing their audience. They were repelling it. So the question becomes, where does a royal couple go when both royalty and Hollywood have no appetite left? Before we answer that, let's zoom out and consider another angle. Meghan didn't enter Hollywood as a newcomer. She was already here once before. She had already walked the red carpets, done the press rounds, worked the auditions, taken the meetings. And when she left Hollywood to marry Prince Harry, the industry didn't resent her. It applauded her. Actually, it envied her a little. Who wouldn't? But when she came back, that's where the story changed. Hollywood expects humility upon return, gratitude, a willingness to work. But instead, insiders claim Meghan re-entered the scene as if she had ascended some invisible ladder. A ladder Hollywood never saw, never recognized, and certainly never endorsed. And that attitude, if true, left a sour taste that grew into something sharper. Disinterest, annoyance, finally, rejection. Now combine that with Harry's reportedly odd behavior in business meetings, the swirling rumors about staff frustration, the decreasing popularity, the political posturing, the failed projects, and suddenly the Hollywood door didn't just close. It locked. Industry insiders quietly began to say it. Then they said it louder. Then Joe Rogan said it publicly. Hollywood is done with Meghan Markle. But let me ask you, and I want you to really think about this. Is Hollywood rejecting Meghan because she failed? Or because she refused to adapt? Or because she overestimated her own star power? Hold that thought for a moment, because there's one more question you'll want to consider before we move forward. What does it really mean when the most powerful entertainment industry on the planet decides you're no longer worth its time? Is it the end? The beginning of another reinvention? Or something far more dramatic? Here's where the story takes its sharpest turn. Because the moment Joe Rogan's comments went viral, Meghan's camp reportedly panicked. Advisors scrambled. Strategies shifted. Calls were made. But by then, the momentum was already rolling in the wrong direction. Hollywood had already moved on. A-listers had already lost interest. Executives had already recalibrated. But what came next? What insiders revealed next? What whispers turned into unmistakable evidence next? That would change everything. And no one, absolutely no one, saw it coming. People are sick of them. The act has gotten stale. That's it. That was the shot heard round the streaming world. A single line, buried casually in a Joe Rogan conversation, suddenly detonated across Hollywood like a gossip grenade with teeth. It wasn't a wild tabloid headline. It wasn't some shadowy, anonymous insider quote. It was Joe, unfiltered, blunt, and with a reach that stretched across every platform, every continent, every inbox, and every PR firm in LA. And here's the kicker. Nobody in Hollywood disagreed. Let that sink in. The man known for hosting MMA fighters, scientists, comedians, and conspiracy theorists had just voiced what every entertainment executive, publicist, and even exasperated assistant had quietly been muttering for months. Meghan Markle and Prince Harry, the golden duo who once held the world's fascination, were no longer welcome at the A-list table. How did we get here? How did Joe Rogan become the mouthpiece for Hollywood's royal exhaustion? Let's rewind. It wasn't long ago that Meghan and Harry were everywhere. Oprah, Time Magazine, Apple TV specials, viral Spotify podcasts, Netflix mega deals, red carpet cameos. They were the global headline. But by the time Joe sat down at that microphone, lit a cigar, and shook his head while calling out the Sussexes, a shift had already happened. Quiet, steady, and irreversible. Joe didn't just speculate. He called it. And millions listened. The timing? Not an accident. This came after months of awkward stumbles, failed business meetings, projects shelved before production, Spotify executives making not-so-subtle jabs about grifters, Netflix downgrading their highly publicized deal. A total lack of buzz. Worse, backlash. But Joe's comment? It did more than sting. It confirmed what people were too polite to say publicly. Let's be real. Joe Rogan is not known for filtering his thoughts. Whether you love him, hate him, or roll your eyes at him, one thing is universally agreed upon. When Joe speaks, people lean in. And on this day, Joe wasn't mincing words. He was done with the act. The same act Hollywood was quietly trying to escape from. What act was he referring to exactly? The constant victim narrative? The curated image of righteous rebels misunderstood by the world? The perpetual playing of both royalty and underdog at the same time? The PR-crafted appearances that always ended in headlines? It didn't matter. Joe had had enough. And Hollywood? It applauded from the shadows. Because here's the truth about the entertainment industry no one likes to admit. When someone powerful says what you were thinking, it's like permission to stop pretending. That's what Joe gave the industry. Permission. Let's talk about what was happening behind the scenes. In the months leading up to that viral comment, there had been growing frustration in elite media circles. Netflix had quietly gone cold. Staff members leaked stories to Vanity Fair about Meghan and Harry's lack of professionalism. Spotify terminated their deal, and a high-level exec openly mocked the couple on air. You don't get that kind of blowback from two of the world's biggest platforms unless something is deeply broken. So when Joe dropped his line, it wasn't provocative. It was confirmation. And the fallout? Instant. Clips of his comments exploded across social media. TikTok, YouTube, Reddit, Instagram. Every corner of the internet lit up. Think pieces emerged within 24 hours. Some defended Meghan, accusing Joe of being misogynistic. Others said he finally said what everyone was afraid to. But no matter where you stood, you couldn't ignore the signal. The tide had turned. Even outlets that once celebrated the Sussexes began shifting tone. Journalists stopped fawning and started questioning. Bloggers who once praised their every move began reporting their failures. PR teams began advising their A-list clients not to associate too publicly. Agents began to avoid pitching projects that involved Meghan or Harry. Too risky, too messy, too much brand fatigue. Joe Rogan didn't start this fire, but he did light the match that exposed it. And let's not forget, Joe is a gatekeeper of modern digital influence. You may not agree with him, but his show is a massive cultural force, especially among people in media, tech, and entertainment. His words echo through boardrooms and writers' rooms alike. When he speaks, it isn't just noise, it's a signal. So when he said, "The act has gotten stale," he wasn't just criticizing them. He was describing the mood of an entire city. Think about that. How rare is it for one person to speak a sentence that shifts the entire energy of a conversation? That's what Joe did. And the reason his comment hit so hard? Because it wasn't about personal drama. It was about professional disappointment. Hollywood loves a good story, but it loves consistency even more. Meghan and Harry brought drama, but not deliverables. They brought headlines, but not hit shows. They brought big expectations, but not big payoffs. And in a town that runs on numbers and narratives, that's a death sentence. Let's break that down. Netflix gave them a multi-year deal. Where's the content? Spotify signed them with huge fanfare. Where's the catalog? Meghan launched a podcast, once. Harry talked about mental health, once. They gave interviews about privacy, and then booked cameras. They talked about being voiceless while hosting global platforms. They claimed to be misunderstood while feeding curated documentaries. Is it a contradiction? Or just bad branding? Either way, the result is the same. Audiences lost interest. And when audiences check out, so does Hollywood. Joe Rogan, in his very Joe Rogan way, didn't sugarcoat it. He just told the truth. The brutal, unvarnished, gut-punch truth that studios had been wrestling with behind closed doors. You're not trending anymore. You're tiring. But why does Joe's opinion matter so much? Because he represents a cross-section of America, and increasingly, the world, that Hollywood needs but struggles to understand. The working-class listeners, the independent thinkers, the people who don't care about titles, palaces, or who wore what to which gala. They care about authenticity. And from their perspective, Meghan and Harry lost it a long time ago. And here's something you might not know. Several insiders from talent agencies and studios reportedly reached out to Rogan after his comment went viral. Not to scold him, not to distance themselves, but to thank him, quietly, off the record, because they agreed and were relieved someone else had said it first. The ripple effect was undeniable. Even A-list celebrities who had previously been photographed with Meghan and Harry began stepping back. Event invitations were quietly declined. Joint appearances fell through. Connections went cold. All from one sentence. But here's what makes this even more fascinating and a little terrifying for Meghan and Harry. Joe Rogan wasn't trying to cancel them. He wasn't even trying to focus on them. His comment was almost an aside, a throwaway moment. But the reaction to that moment revealed the truth. This wasn't just about one opinion. It was about momentum. And momentum, once lost in Hollywood, is nearly impossible to regain. Think of how fast public sentiment can shift. Think of how quickly the it couple becomes the why are they still around couple. Meghan and Harry didn't fall from grace. They slipped, tripped, and watched the world shrug. And Joe Rogan? He just pointed at the fall. Let me ask you something. If you had the world's attention, global sympathy, power deals, the press eating out of your palm, what would you do with it? Would you build? Would you create? Would you prove them all wrong? Or would you overplay your hand? That's what Meghan and Harry are being accused of. And the worst part? Hollywood has no patience for slow learners. So when Joe Rogan casually confirmed that the industry was sick of the act, what he really said was something much deeper. The spell is broken. The mystique is gone. And the game is over. Or is it? Because just when it seemed like the door had closed permanently, Meghan tried to make a move. One final move to win Hollywood back. And it failed. But what that move was, and why it collapsed so fast, that's where things get even darker. Imagine landing a $100 million deal and losing it before the ink even dries. That's not just a career misstep. That's a seismic fall from grace. A fall so loud, so awkward, that Hollywood insiders still whisper about it at parties like it's some kind of cautionary tale. Don't do a Meghan Markle. And that deal? It was with Netflix. The very empire that reshaped the entertainment world. The platform that prints global fame and fortune for the chosen few. The company that gave Harry and Meghan what many people thought was a blank check for storytelling, only to quietly downgrade it later into a hollow, shaky, first-look agreement. But let's not rush past that too quickly, because at first, the announcement was massive. Headlines screamed, Harry and Meghan signed multi-year Netflix deal. Everyone thought the Sussexes were on their way to dominating Hollywood. They had just moved to California. They had just split from royal duties. They were free, and Netflix, apparently, was their new kingdom. For a moment, it looked like they had it all, until the cameras stopped rolling, because nothing ever really got off the ground. Let's break it down. When the deal was announced in September 2020, it was described as a multi-year agreement through Archwell Productions. Netflix and the Sussexes jointly declared their commitment to creating content that informs, but also gives hope. The kind of language that screams ambition, inspiration, and modern royalty rebranding. But behind the scenes, very different story. Insiders say the Sussexes walked into their Netflix relationship with grand visions, but no real production experience. They had no studio, no team, no showrunners, no network of veteran producers. What they had were lofty ideas and the media glow of their royal exit. That glow didn't last long. The first major project they promised, Pearl, an animated series about a 12-year-old girl inspired by influential women from history, was quietly scrapped by Netflix less than 2 years later. No release, no trailer, no fanfare, just gone. And with it, so was the illusion that the Sussexes were about to take over Hollywood. The truth? They were stumbling, and Netflix noticed. Behind closed doors, insiders say the $100 million multi-year deal was quickly downgraded to a first-look deal. Translation: if you bring us something good, we'll think about it. But you're not getting a guaranteed green light anymore. That's not just a shift in contract terms. That's a demotion. And worse, it's a humiliation. Because in Hollywood, everyone knows when you get downgraded. Word spreads fast. Assistants talk. Executives hint. Agents whisper. And soon, you're radioactive. But here's where things take a darker turn. At one point, and this is confirmed by multiple sources, an idea was floated to Prince Harry during a meeting. A lighthearted series where he would review a different hot chocolate brand each week, inviting friends to chat in a relaxed, casual setting. It was pitched half seriously, half jokingly, but it wasn't laughed off by everyone. Netflix was desperate to find something that Harry could do that didn't require serious hosting skills, deep research, or structured narrative development. Just sit, sip, chat. Harry's team rejected the idea. And in that moment, according to someone in the room, one executive sighed and said, "They don't know what they want, but they know what they don't want." That's the problem. It's a brutal quote, but it explains everything. Meghan and Harry, despite their global platform, never developed a clear creative identity. Were they storytellers? Were they victims? Were they lifestyle curators? Political activists? Mental health advocates? Children's content producers? Netflix couldn't market what they couldn't define, and that's where the disaster lies. It wasn't just that Meghan and Harry failed to produce content. It's that they couldn't tell Netflix, or anyone else, who they really wanted to be. Hollywood can work with difficult. It can work with demanding, but it cannot work with confused. And so the Netflix chapter, the one that was supposed to be the Sussexes' Hollywood coronation, ended with a whimper, not a roar. But here's the twist. Netflix wasn't even the worst of it. Because while they were quietly downgrading the deal, another company was preparing to slam the door shut, loudly, publicly, and without apology. And that company? Spotify. What came next would humiliate Meghan and Harry in a way that even Netflix hadn't dared. And the entire industry watched. When a Spotify executive publicly called Meghan Markle and Prince Harry ing grifters, the world did a double take. Did he really just say that? Yes, he did. And not in private, not in a leak, but on a podcast, loud and clear for the entire industry to hear. Those two words, grifters, out loud. It was the kind of statement that cuts through PR fluff like a buzzsaw. Brutal, raw, almost unthinkable. But what shocked insiders wasn't just the insult. It was who said it, and why he felt so free to do so. Because Bill Simmons wasn't some low-level Spotify tech guy or mid-tier editor. He was a top Spotify executive, the creator of The Ringer, a man who sold his company to Spotify for hundreds of millions, a man who had influence, and he was fed up. But let's back up. Because before Bill Simmons dropped that viral insult, things at Spotify had already started to spiral out of control behind the scenes. It all began with huge expectations. Spotify's deal with Meghan and Harry was supposed to be historic, a multi-million-dollar exclusive agreement. Archwell Audio was meant to be their platform, their voice, their post-royal, progressive communication pipeline. Meghan was heralded as the next big voice in podcasting before a single episode had been recorded. But once again, just like with Netflix, the reality never lived up to the promise. Months passed. No episodes. No trailers. No teasers. Nothing. Then came a 35-minute holiday special in 2020, featuring Meghan, Harry, and a few celebrity guests like Elton John. It felt safe, fluffy, directionless. No substance. No follow-up. Just one glorified audio Christmas card. Spotify was patient. At first. But what executives expected next, a regular podcast series, didn't come for nearly 2 years. Think about that. 2 years. In an industry where production cycles move at lightning speed, Meghan and Harry were stalling like an engine with no gas. Then finally, Archetypes. Meghan's big podcast. Her moment. The Flagship Project, a show to explore the labels that try to hold women back. It launched in 2022 to massive fanfare. It even briefly topped the Spotify charts in multiple countries. But behind the scenes, chaos. According to Vanity Fair and several internal sources, Spotify employees were deeply frustrated with how difficult the Sussexes were to work with. There were creative disagreements, missed deadlines, script rewrites, production slowdowns, and a general lack of direction. One staff member described the process as like waiting on royalty, literally. And in case you think that's just gossip, think again. Insiders claim Meghan's team was incredibly controlling, down to the smallest details. Scripts were micromanaged, guest selections were scrutinized, recording sessions were rigid, and Meghan reportedly insisted on approval over nearly every production element. It wasn't collaboration. It was monarchy in exile. And Spotify? They weren't having it. The show's success was short-lived. After just one season, 12 episodes, Archetypes quietly ended. No renewal. No second season announcement. No press release thanking the hosts. Just silence. And soon after, Spotify cut the entire deal. This was a public breakup. And that's when Bill Simmons, the Spotify executive with zero filter, unleashed the line heard round the world. I wish I had been involved in the ing grifters meeting, he said on his podcast. He didn't just say Meghan and Harry were difficult. He accused them of pretending, of gaming the system, of making grand promises, taking the check, and walking away with almost nothing to show for it. And remember, this wasn't an ex-staffer ranting online. This was a high-ranking executive at Spotify, saying what many in the industry had long suspected, but were too cautious to voice. Let me ask you this. What kind of behavior provokes that kind of public anger from a top-tier executive? How badly do you have to burn a bridge before someone lights a match on air? Because if Bill Simmons felt that comfortable speaking out, you better believe the frustration ran deep. Spotify had invested millions, gambled their reputation on Meghan and Harry, and got, what? A single short podcast season and a whole lot of excuses? Here's the part most people don't realize. Spotify gave Meghan every opportunity to succeed. They assembled top producers. They offered editing support. They cleared promotional space. They even tried to help Harry find his voice. Yes, Harry. Because, believe it or not, Spotify reportedly tried to pitch Harry his own podcast idea. And what was it? An idea floated, half seriously, half desperately, where Harry would review a different hot chocolate brand each week, all while chatting with a rotating lineup of guests. Insiders said the idea came after Harry's now infamous hot chocolate request at a meeting. When asked what kind of project he might enjoy, Harry reportedly said something about being relaxed and keeping it fun. And from that vague comment, someone joked, "What if you just did a hot chocolate show?" But here's the catch. It wasn't a joke to everyone. Spotify was so unsure of what to do with Harry, they considered it. Just think about that. A prince of the United Kingdom, reduced to sipping cocoa into a microphone because nobody could figure out what he was actually good at in a media setting. Harry's team turned the idea down, of course. But that rejection spoke volumes. They didn't want to play along. They didn't want to experiment. They didn't want to create content that was fun or flexible or honest. They wanted control. And in the podcast world, where authenticity is king, control is the fastest way to kill your own momentum. Let's get personal for a moment. If you were Spotify and you handed someone $20 million to make a podcast, wouldn't you expect more than one season? More than 12 episodes? More than the sound of your own staff sighing in frustration behind closed doors? Because that's what was happening. One Spotify executive, anonymously quoted in industry reports, said, "It was like dealing with two people who had no idea what they were doing, but thought they were smarter than everyone else in the room." Harsh, cold, but telling. Spotify didn't just cancel the deal. They wanted everyone to know they canceled the deal. They didn't bury the story. They let it run. They let Bill Simmons talk. They let the media speculate. Because silence is one thing, but a public embarrassment? That's Hollywood's version of exile. And guess what happened next? Phone calls stopped. Meetings disappeared. Project pitches dried up. Talent agents started backing away. Because once Spotify bailed, publicly, it gave every other platform an excuse to step back without looking petty. Netflix started dragging its feet. Amazon passed on new concepts. Disney? Not even a whisper. And Meghan and Harry were left alone. Here's where things get surreal. Despite all of this, despite the millions, the staffers, the opportunities, the microphones handed to them, Meghan and Harry still insisted that they were misunderstood, still claimed they weren't given enough creative freedom, still framed it as a missed chance to share important stories. But Hollywood had already made up its mind. They weren't misunderstood. They were unprepared. They weren't silenced. They were just bad at the job. And Spotify? Spotify had receipts, canceled contracts, angry producers, wasted time, and a podcast graveyard that echoed with the sound of one executive's final, brutal assessment. Grifters. But what happens when two of the most recognizable figures on Earth get publicly humiliated by the very industry they tried to conquer? Do they retreat? Do they reflect? Or do they double down? The answer is more dramatic than you think. Because after Spotify slammed the door shut, Meghan and Harry made a new move. A bigger one. A move that would send shockwaves across Hollywood, again. And this time, it would involve A-listers. The kind who now wanted nothing to do with them. She's just too much. That's how one high-powered studio executive reportedly described Meghan Markle during a private industry dinner in Beverly Hills. Not talented, but difficult. Not misunderstood. Not polarizing. Just too much. And that one phrase? It echoed across Hollywood circles like a coded signal. A quiet green light to a conversation people had been biting their tongues about for far too long. Because behind the glam photos, the public smiles, and the charity speeches, Hollywood had turned. And not loudly, not dramatically, but surgically, silently, strategically. Executives weren't returning calls. Invitations were being lost. Productions suddenly went into development hell. Meetings turned into reschedules, turned into unavailable indefinitely. On the surface, nothing looked different. But below the glittering surface, the Sussex brand was dying in real time, and Hollywood was watching the collapse from a safe distance. This is the chapter where we uncover the truth no one's admitting on record. Meghan Markle didn't just burn bridges in Hollywood. She wore gasoline as perfume and walked straight into the fire. Let's go back to where it started. After their explosive Oprah interview, Meghan and Harry were the hottest thing in town. Everyone, and I mean everyone, wanted a piece of them. Agencies, studios, nonprofits, magazines. You name it. Executives circled like hawks in cashmere suits. They saw opportunity, buzz, audience potential. They saw clicks. And in Hollywood, clicks mean green. But then came the problem. Meghan wasn't easy to work with. And that's putting it mildly. According to several sources who spoke off-record to major outlets, Meghan walked into meetings not like a collaborator, but like a queen. Not in status, in attitude. She didn't take notes. She gave instructions. She didn't pitch shows. She outlined mandates. She didn't listen to feedback. She interpreted it as criticism. And Hollywood? It doesn't play well with people who don't play ball. One executive who sat in on an early pitch meeting described her behavior like this. She came in with an idea that had no structure, no narrative arc, and no market testing, but acted like we should be grateful just to be hearing it. That's not a pitch. That's entitlement. And Hollywood, as fake as it can be, runs on a brutally real rule. You can be high maintenance if you're high return. Meghan, in their eyes, was neither. Then there was the reputation management machine. Meghan's team, highly curated, extremely protective, and often combative, was notorious for controlling narrative flow to the point of paranoia. Publicists whispered that working with her team was like trying to hug a cactus. Want to hear how fast that kind of attitude gets around? Think warp speed. In the industry, your reputation walks into the room 15 minutes before you do. By the time Meghan showed up at any function, the room already knew what they were dealing with. Someone who brought press, but not peace. Drama, but not discipline. Let's break it down further. Meghan didn't have a signature film under her belt. She didn't win awards. She wasn't known for a body of creative work. Her fame came from a whirlwind romance, a royal wedding, and a global exit strategy. Hollywood isn't romantic. It's transactional. And the transaction began to look like a loss. One exec reportedly joked, "We expected Beyoncé energy and got PowerPoint slides from a personal rebrand." That kind of sarcasm doesn't surface unless someone feels let down, hard. Then there's the social layer. Meghan, It turns out, tried to network her way into elite Hollywood circles and failed. According to multiple sources, Meghan actively tried to build friendships with A-listers, actresses, producers, even fashion power players. But the relationships never stuck. Texts weren't returned. Dinner invites declined. Events moved to a smaller venue. Why? Because the energy shifted. Celebrity friendships in Hollywood are like stock options. If your value is trending up, people want to be seen with you. If your value crashes, they ghost you faster than a bad investment. Meghan's value, at least in the eyes of insiders, was tanking, not just from poor performance, but from overexposure. She was everywhere, on the cover of every magazine, in every headline, at every charity gala, on every trending tweet. And that kind of omnipresence burns through public goodwill fast. What's the old saying? Familiarity breeds contempt. In Hollywood, it breeds career death. Executives began to murmur the ultimate kiss of death. Her brand is exhausted. Not controversial. Not hated. Exhausted. The worst part? She didn't even see it coming. Because while she was trying to build her empire, the foundation had already cracked. The agents who once fought for her meetings stopped returning emails. The producers who once praised her vision suddenly had other priorities. The fashion houses who once gifted her dresses quietly cut ties. And here's something you won't read in Variety. At least two well-known actresses, both A-listers, were approached to collaborate with Meghan on future projects. Both declined. One reportedly said, "I support her, but I can't work with her. It's a PR nightmare waiting to happen." Brutal, but revealing. Meghan wasn't being boycotted. She wasn't being silenced. She was being quietly excluded. That's the Hollywood way. No confrontation. No headlines. Just doors that no longer open. Calls that stop coming. Events you're not invited to. A fade to black that happens so subtly, you don't even notice until you're standing alone. And then came the worst realization of all. Even her proximity to royalty no longer bought her immunity. The novelty had worn off. The sparkle was gone. The stories had been told, and retold, and re-edited into documentaries. There was nothing left to sell, except the same tired narrative. And Hollywood? It was tired of buying. Let me ask you. If the most powerful studios in the world decide you're too much, where do you go? If agents begin referring to you as PR risky, how do you book projects? If A-listers whisper behind your back that they don't want that energy around, how do you rebuild? You don't. Not unless you change. Not unless you adapt. But Meghan's camp didn't adapt. They pushed harder. They demanded more control. They blamed the media. They rejected criticism. They tripled down. And Hollywood? Hollywood tripled down in return by shutting her out entirely. Here's something that should give you chills. An insider at a major production company recently said, "If Meghan called tomorrow with an incredible script, I don't know who would take the meeting. Even if the story was great. No one wants the baggage. No one." And it wasn't just about her. It was about the package deal. The unrelenting media glare. The lawsuits. The leaks. The endless narrative management. Producers want stars, not storms. And Meghan had become a Category 5 PR hurricane. But here's the twist. Just when you think it couldn't get any more isolating for her, it did. Because as the executives were ghosting Meghan, they were doing something even colder behind the scenes. They were ghosting Harry, too. The same man who once made history by walking away from royalty was now being walked away from by Hollywood. And what happened to Harry inside this growing storm? That's a story of its own. Because his reputation didn't just sink with Meghan's. It sank harder. And the moment it hit rock bottom, it involved the very people he thought would always have his back. She thought she was stepping into Hollywood as a queen. Hollywood saw her as a guest. And that gap, between how Meghan Markle viewed herself and how the industry saw her, became the chasm that swallowed her entire reputation. This is the story of the vanity versus reality problem. The illusion. The misfire. The fatal branding mistake that turned Meghan's Hollywood dream into a slow, silent implosion. Because in the film industry, perception is power, but it must align with reality. And Meghan? Her perception was royal, divine, untouchable. The reality? She was a struggling creative with no track record in a world where track records are everything. Let's peel back the layers. In Meghan's mind, she wasn't just returning to Hollywood. She was ascending to the top of it. She believed her royal status had permanently rewritten her resume, that the tiara replaced the hustle, that the palace gave her the credentials she never earned on set. And let's be fair, that assumption wasn't totally unfounded. She had been on the cover of Time, Vogue, Vanity Fair, People. She had global name recognition. The world had watched her wedding. Streaming platforms threw money at her. Every talk show wanted a piece of her voice. But here's the brutal truth no one told her. Or maybe they did, and she refused to hear it. Hollywood does not care who you are. It cares what you bring. You could be a duchess, a princess, a literal queen. But if you don't deliver content that sells, content that moves people, content that keeps eyeballs glued to screens, you're just another name in a sea of glitter. Meghan mistook attention for authority, fame for talent, clicks for staying power, and Hollywood noticed. Let's get specific. When Meghan launched Archwell Productions, the assumption was that she'd follow in the footsteps of Oprah, Reese Witherspoon, or even Shonda Rhimes. Powerful women who carved empires by knowing how to tell a story. But Meghan's brand was never storytelling. It was self-storytelling. There's a difference. Storytelling serves the audience. Self-storytelling serves the ego. That's what producers saw. That's what directors feared. That's what executives began whispering. She only knows how to talk about herself. She doesn't build characters. She builds caricatures. She's not pitching stories. She's pitching herself as the story. And here's a fact many outside the industry don't realize. Hollywood doesn't want a star who needs attention. It wants a star who commands attention without asking for it. Meghan kept asking. Public letters, TV specials, magazine op-eds, podcast intros about how she never felt heard, press statements about her pain. It was always her. Even when discussing larger issues like mental health, racism, or women's rights, the framing looped back to her experience, her trauma, her mistreatment. And after a while, even the most supportive voices in Hollywood started saying the quiet part out loud. It's exhausting. Meghan's obsession with curating her image, with controlling every headline, every camera angle, every scripted word, became her Achilles heel. Because in this town, perfection is suspicious. Audiences don't want a goddess. They want a flawed, relatable, resilient human being who still shines. And that's where reality slapped vanity in the face. Meghan never allowed herself to be real. Not raw, not messy, not vulnerable in the way that builds deep, lasting fan loyalty. Instead, she polished every word, posed every smile, choreographed every interaction, and somewhere along the way, lost the very thing that makes someone captivating on camera. Authenticity. Let me ask you, when was the last time you saw Meghan just be herself? Not Duchess Meghan, not Archwell CEO Meghan, not curated megawatt smile Meghan. Just Meghan. The world didn't see it, and Hollywood stopped waiting for it. Behind closed doors, executives started calling her a brand without a product. That's brutal, but it's also accurate. A brand, no matter how shiny, eventually collapses without real output. And the few products she did release lacked punch. Archetypes, a podcast framed around breaking down stereotypes, but ended up featuring soft interviews with A-list guests, some of which were edited to the point where listeners couldn't tell what was genuine and what was planned. Pearl? The animated series about a girl inspired by historic female icons, canceled before a single frame was aired. Books? None ghostwritten by Meghan herself. TV? None pitched that got picked up post-Netflix downgrade. Movies? Zero. Meanwhile, the vanity campaign never stopped. Posing in front of UN flags. Visiting schools with photographers trailing. Gala appearances with symbolic wardrobe messaging. Instagram-perfect aesthetics, all carefully managed. But without tangible success to back it up, the performance felt hollow. A former executive at one of the major streaming platforms reportedly said, Meghan has created a visual identity, but she has no creative identity. Let that sit for a moment. It's the ultimate Hollywood insult. You look the part, but you don't have the part. You've dressed the mannequin, but there's no character inside. And when Harry tried to step into the void, pitching his own ideas, producing content under their joint venture, the industry didn't exactly roll out the red carpet. Why? Because Harry's reputation was tied to Meghan's, and Meghan's reputation was tied to unfulfilled expectations. It was a loop of diminishing returns. Even when Meghan appeared at events, the whispers followed her. She thinks she's the new Diana. She's playing chess with checkers skills. She's mistaking brand for credibility. And here's where the story takes a darker turn. Meghan didn't just believe she was above the Hollywood grind. She believed she could redefine it. She tried to bypass the ladder, jump straight to the top, be the producer and the star and the icon and the boss. But that doesn't work here. Ask anyone in town, from makeup artist to mogul, and they'll tell you the same thing. You don't skip the climb. Not even if you've walked the halls of Buckingham Palace. Because in this town, royalty doesn't impress. Work ethic does. And Meghan, for all her vision, never earned the reputation of being a builder, a fighter, a creator who stays in the room until the final cut. She was known for her image, not her output, for her presence, not her performance. And once that became the dominant narrative, there was no saving the brand. The vanity versus reality gap had become too wide, too obvious, too irreparable. And what made it worse? She didn't seem to notice. She kept walking into rooms as if the world owed her something, instead of walking in ready to prove herself. And by the time the reality caught up with the vanity, the doors were already quietly closing behind her, one after another. But if you think Meghan was the only one losing altitude, you'd be wrong. Because just as her star dimmed, the spotlight shifted. To her husband, to Harry, and what Hollywood began to say about him. It was even more brutal. Because Harry wasn't just seen as the sidekick. He was now seen as lost. What happened to Harry as Meghan's brand began to collapse? What rumors started circulating about his behavior, even in the most basic of meetings? And what secret nickname did Netflix insiders allegedly use behind his back? That's where we go next. And once you hear it, you won't look at Harry the same way again. He was supposed to be the breakout star, the rebel prince, the cool one, the anti-monarchist turned media icon, the guy who walked away from Buckingham Palace and landed in Montecito like a royal James Dean. That was the pitch. And for a moment, just a moment, people bought it. But then came the meetings, the projects, the opportunities, the deadlines, the content, the pressure, and one by one, people in Hollywood began whispering the same thing. Harry's in over his head. This is the story no one wanted to say out loud at first. Not because it wasn't obvious, but because it was awkward, because it was sad, because, unlike Meghan, Harry had no history in the entertainment business, no headshots, no red carpets, no experience building a brand in this arena. But Hollywood doesn't do sympathy. It does performance. And Harry? He didn't deliver. Let's go to the first major red flag. One former Netflix consultant, speaking off record, described a now viral internal moment that left everyone stunned. Harry arrived 15 minutes late to a high-level strategy meeting, she said. He came in casual, no notes, no presentation, no real plan. He sat down, smiled, and asked if anyone had hot chocolate. The room froze, not because the request was offensive, but because it was childish, out of place, disconnected from the business at hand. Think about that. You're in a room with executives overseeing 9-figure content portfolios. You've been given the rarest gift in media, a multi-year production deal with no resume, and you open with a drink request. That moment went viral inside Netflix. Emails flew, texts buzzed, employees laughed behind closed doors, not because they hated Harry, but because they couldn't believe it. The hot chocolate moment became a metaphor, a meme, a sign that the prince didn't know the rules of the new kingdom he was trying to rule. And it didn't stop there. Multiple reports from production teams, both at Spotify and Netflix, described Harry as distracted, unprepared, and rarely focused. They said he often deferred to Meghan or avoided major decision-making altogether. In some rooms, his nickname became the passenger. That's brutal, because it doesn't just suggest Harry was a background player. It suggests he wasn't driving anything, that he was along for the ride, nodding, smiling, sipping cocoa, while Meghan steered the ship into a storm. And when he did speak, according to insiders, Harry would ramble. He'd talk about his personal life, childhood trauma, the palace, the press. And while those topics made for great headlines, they rarely translated into actual content strategies. Let's pause there, because that's important. Harry mistook pain for product. He believed his story, his wounds, his drama, his betrayal, was enough to build a media empire. But in Hollywood, personal tragedy is just the beginning of the pitch, not the whole pitch. You still need characters, structure, scripts, conflict, a payoff, a purpose beyond catharsis. Harry didn't get that. He thought vulnerability was the brand. But what's vulnerability without vision? Just venting. That's how studio execs began to describe him. One producer even said, "Every meeting with Harry felt like a therapy session. I didn't know if I was supposed to greenlight a show or hand him a tissue." And once that perception settled in, it was over. Hollywood stopped seeing Harry as a creator. They started seeing him as a liability, an overexposed celebrity with no creative backbone. Even his once global sympathy, the boy who lost his mother, who walked behind her coffin at age 12, who escaped the monarchy, even that began to wear thin. Because sympathy has an expiration date in this town. And Harry's outsider prince storyline? It had been told, and retold, and stretched, and monetized, and finally rejected. Especially after Spare. The memoir was supposed to be Harry's defining work, his truth, his emotional cleansing. But it became a punchline. Frozen penises, bathroom fights with his brother, mushroom trips in someone else's backyard. Hollywood cringed. Because while vulnerability can be powerful, oversharing is corrosive. You can't be a mystery and a memoir at the same time. And after Spare, the mystique was gone. Now let's talk about confidence. Because one of the most dangerous things you can be in Hollywood is insecure and powerful. And insiders say Harry walked into rooms unsure, and then tried to mask that uncertainty with title-based authority. One streaming executive said, he'd reference the royal family constantly, but we weren't pitching Buckingham Palace. We were trying to make TV. There it is. Harry never learned how to separate the prince from the producer. He thought one justified the other. But in Hollywood, they're not interested in your crown. They want your script. And Harry? He didn't have one. Even in projects he was passionate about, like mental health, he struggled to build consistent narratives. Do you remember The Me You Can't See? The Apple TV Plus series he co-produced with Oprah? It had potential, big names, a critical issue. But after the first wave of interest, it faded. No second season, no follow-up initiative, no content pipeline. Why? Because Harry didn't know how to evolve the concept. He had stories, but no infrastructure. He had trauma, but no team. He had ambition, but no application. And the people who initially surrounded him, consultants, experts, co-producers, they began disappearing. Quietly, professionally, but permanently. Some left due to creative differences. Others cited logistics. A few simply never took another call. The signal was clear. Harry wasn't leading. He was wandering. And you can't wander your way through Hollywood. It'll chew you up, spit you out, and replace you before you even realize you're gone. Let me ask you something. What happens when the industry that once fought to book you starts ignoring your calls? What happens when the platform that once featured your voice now deletes your channel? What happens when you walk into a meeting and no one remembers your last project? You fade. And that's what happened to Harry. His name still made headlines. But not because of content. Because of conflict. Because of lawsuits. Royal fallout. Embarrassing press. Public arguments. Staff turnover. Canceled deals. And worst of all, silence. Silence from platforms. Silence from studios. Silence from sponsors. Hollywood wasn't attacking Harry. It was abandoning him. Because in this town, if you can't evolve, you evaporate. And Harry, the rebel prince who was supposed to become a media king, had become a footnote. Even his own team began to fracture. Reports surfaced that Archwell was restructuring, that key executives were stepping down, that new directions were being considered. Translation? They were out of ideas. And so was he. But here's the cliffhanger. Just when Harry's Hollywood credibility reached rock bottom, Meghan made a move. Not to protect him, not to reset their image, but to try, one more time, to control the narrative. And this time, it involved silencing a pitch so bizarre, so desperate, so revealing. It became the final straw for industry insiders. What did Meghan's team reject behind closed doors that could have actually saved their media careers? And why did their decision trigger eye rolls across every streaming boardroom in California? That's next. And once you hear it, you'll realize they were never in this to build stories. They were only ever trying to build themselves. She wanted to own the story. Every headline, every shot, every quote, every whisper. But in Hollywood, Control is not power. Control is resistance. And in Meghan Markle's case, it became a losing war she couldn't stop waging. This is the chapter where it all begins to unravel. Not from scandal, not from betrayal, but from an obsession with curation so extreme that it strangled the very thing she was chasing. Authenticity. Because in today's Hollywood, people don't want perfection. They want real, raw, relatable. They want you, not a rehearsed version of you. But Meghan never gave them that. Instead, she gave them control. Smiles that didn't touch the eyes. Speeches that sounded like they came from a crisis communications firm. Podcasts edited within an inch of their soul. Press releases instead of vulnerability. Stylized silence instead of human imperfection. Let's break it down. When Meghan launched Archetypes, the podcast was pitched as a bold, brave exploration of how women are labeled and held back by society. But within the first few episodes, something became painfully clear. It wasn't a podcast. It was a brand campaign. A PR product disguised as a discussion. Episodes were polished. Interviews pre-vetted. Guests reportedly edited. Even Meghan's own voice, sometimes overly breathy, sometimes drenched in dramatic pauses, felt more like a voiceover than a conversation. And the industry noticed. Spotify insiders began calling the show a high-gloss, low-impact product. One producer allegedly said, "It sounded like someone trying to prove they were interesting, not someone being interesting." And let's not forget the elephant in the editing room. Multiple reports claim that Meghan didn't conduct several of the interviews herself. That's right. Some of the conversations you heard on Archetypes were allegedly carried out by staff, producers, researchers, assistants, and then edited to sound like Meghan was the one conducting them. Whether it was true for all or just a few episodes, the damage was done. Authenticity gone. Credibility fractured. Trust evaporated. Meghan's need to control the final product overrode the one thing podcasting requires, rawness. But it didn't stop with Spotify. In internal meetings with Netflix, Meghan's team reportedly tried to overmanage every single aspect of production. They didn't just want approval rights, they wanted creative veto. That meant Meghan could kill a shot, a line, even an entire scene if it didn't align with the brand. One Netflix collaborator described it like this: "We weren't making documentaries. We were making campaign videos with royalty who wanted to look vulnerable without actually being vulnerable." Let that sink in. They wanted to appear vulnerable, not be vulnerable, because vulnerability means giving up control, and Meghan couldn't do it, even in moments where honesty could have elevated her. Where a little mess could have made her magnetic, she chose polish. During Harry and Meghan, the Netflix docuseries, viewers noticed something odd. Scenes were so perfectly framed, so deliberately lit, so carefully composed. Nothing felt spontaneous. Nothing felt unexpected. Nothing felt like a couple just living, breathing, struggling, loving. Everything felt branded. And guess what? The audience felt it too. Yes, the series pulled in big opening numbers, but engagement didn't hold. Emotional connection was weak. Memes outpaced praise. And even critics who wanted to support them couldn't help but comment on how self-involved the storytelling felt. The whole thing played like a media autobiography, curated and copyright protected. And when Netflix executives tried to push back, when they suggested edits, structure, narrative arcs, Meghan's team reportedly stonewalled. One insider claimed that any suggestion that didn't align with the tone Meghan wanted was shut down immediately. But here's the irony. The tone Meghan wanted was safe. And safety kills storytelling. Because stories, real ones, require risk. They require discomfort. They require imperfection. And Meghan, locked in the palace of her own brand strategy, couldn't go there. Which brings us to the pitch that could have changed everything. After Spotify and Netflix both began pulling away, Meghan was approached with an idea from an independent media agency working with a major studio. The concept? A raw, limited series docu-style project, 6 episodes. No filters. No glam squad. No voiceovers. Just Meghan, candid, unguarded, reflecting on her journey from Hollywood to the palace and back again. Think of it like The Crown, behind the scenes, but real. No editors. No team notes. Just truth. The title? Unscripted. Industry execs thought it was genius. It had a built-in audience. It gave Meghan a chance to reframe everything. It would finally let people see her, not hear about her, not read about her, but see her without the filter. And she said no. Her team rejected it. Flat. Sources say the rejection wasn't polite. It wasn't strategic. It was immediate and unapologetic. They said it was inappropriate, unstructured, and beneath her brand. Beneath her brand. Just sit with that. The opportunity to reboot her image, to rebuild trust, to go from misunderstood to magnetic, was dismissed because it didn't offer enough control. And that's when the last few Hollywood believers gave up. One industry veteran reportedly said, that was her out. That was her shot. That was the show that would have made everyone say, we were wrong. But she couldn't do it. Because control, not connection, was the goal all along. And when your image becomes more important than your impact, you lose both. Now here's where the story hits the twist. At the very moment Meghan was rejecting the project that could have saved her narrative, A-listers in Hollywood were starting to make a quiet decision. Not to criticize her, not to cancel her, but to distance themselves completely. What happened when the celebrity elite, the ones she desperately wanted to sit beside, started ignoring her invitations, skipping her events, and whispering that she had become toxic?